we're going to cover. Course review. Like I said, you're not going to start from scratch. The expanded toolkit. I'm going to give you some of the updates on the state of the art when it comes to coding. Much better than we were even the last time everyone took the 101 course. I'm also going to teach you a bunch of tricks. I have different colleagues and employees burning tokens when they don't need to, and so I want to show you how you can use these tools and not end up just getting lots of bills and not kind of getting to your goal, right? We'll talk about automation domains, where agents do the best return on investment, and then we'll go over some security and agents. Last but not least, swarming in the future. I want to talk about how when you build an agent, at least right now, how the agents work, how you can secure them, but how they can do work for you. And then last but not least, the swarming side, like how do you get all the agents to work together? So if you're really good, I talked about this in my last class and still true, you should not be building God agents. And what I mean by that is you shouldn't be building one agent to do everything. Just like you shouldn't build an application to do everything. You should have modules in an application that deal with intake, they deal with processing, they deal with customer interactions, and those are all separate modules. You can do the same thing with agents, because agents are actually a little bit more problematic, and we'll talk about that. So let's go over the recap. So lexicon, if I say LLM, I mean large language models. I'm really talking about the state of the art, and I'm not talking about the small language models, right? And right now, a small language model is what was a large language model just 3 years ago. Rules of engagement. Also, you guys have to understand that my expectations, you're going to ask AI first. And really what I mean by that is a lot of times when you take these classes, you're like, oh, I'm supposed to learn everything in that class. Well, you're not going to be a great AI developer in, a lot of you, this will be 7 hours, but really 3 hours. You're gonna learn best practices and you're going to be able to apply those, but you're not going to be 100%. And so the other thing is, if you're caught, the best thing to do is ask an AI. And the other thing I like to do, and a lot of you already do this, is maybe if I'm working in Anthropic with Claude or Sonnet, I'm going to ask ChatGPT, right? And if I'm also so if I'm working in one environment, I'm going to ask the questions on the other environment. And that's the really important thing to remember, is that you actually want to know what model is the best to use at that time for that specific task. And you also want to be able to come in and also play the models against themselves so you get the furthest and not burn tokens. Plus, one of the things that happens if you're only using one environment, the tools seem to get used to how you work with them, and they burn a lot more tokens. So if they notice that you're pulling a markdown file and you're doing different things on different platforms, I'm not saying they're conserving, but you're burning tokens on 2 different platforms and you're not running out of tokens on one. So the other thing is, I talked about this before, and I have this problem even in our own company. It's like, if you understand and know your business, you're going to be the best developer. I'm not the best developer for you. I'm here to help you, but I'm not the best developer for you. You have got to know what you're doing. The days of having developers that just write code and don't understand the business, they're absolutely, going to have to retrain themselves. Because before, you could be a good developer and not have the depth in the knowledge area. Well, now, whatever you learned in your job and your sector in the area you're in, like I said, if you're in a sector that I don't understand, I'm not going to be a better AI developer than you. You know what you want to accomplish. You know what to expect. And this is a really important part, because it used to be you had to get a bunch of developers, throw them in a room, and knock down a bunch of tasks. Now, one developer, as core, and maybe support for QA, configuration, and backend. But the truth is, you are going to run your own AI.
You just muted yourself, Waylon. I'm drinking.
Interesting. No, I'm not muting myself. It's muting itself. I don't know why it's doing that. Must be my mic. But I'll stop moving so much. The binary choices right now, whether you're an executive, you're a manager, or a worker, you really don't have a choice. You have to adopt AI, and you have to integrate it into your workforce. If you don't, no matter what job you're in, because of the hardware automation that's coming, the software that's already here, I hate to say it, like we're going to be hiring less and less and less people. And if you don't know how to use AI and apply it to your problem set, those are the only people that are going to be around in the short future. And that's also true for companies. If you haven't figured out a way to really bring in AI and use it as a force multiplier, you're going to be really way behind the power curve. And I got a bunch of people on the meeting right now that have taken, don't have a tech background at all. They've created their own entire application stacks. They know their business, and they've built these applications and they're updating these applications all the time, no tech background whatsoever. So if you're saying, well, I don't really want to get into AI, I'm not a tech person, it's not a choice anymore. And it's not a choice for any of your organizations. It's coming. You either learn it, you adopt it, and we call it embrace the suck or embrace the change, or you're going to be left way behind. So it doesn't matter what field you're in. And then, the 10-20-70 rule is it's 10% the algorithms, 20% the tech.
You're mute again, Waylon.
I'm not sure why I keep on getting mic'd. My technology is, once again, I'm wrong. The 20% technology is holding me down. I don't know. Whoever is muting, if you're muting me, please stop, because I'm not muting myself. I'll just keep this down here. But the 10-20-70 rule is, I hear a lot of, when I go into organizations, oh, we can't use AI, it didn't work. No, it's not that AI doesn't work. It's that either your people haven't been trained on it, they don't understand it, they gave up, or they're the reason it's not working. They're the ones pushing back. So that's when I talk about the 70% people and process rule. You got to have process of integrating it. You got to train your people. You got to make sure they're open to adopting it. And that is very critical. Because if you don't do that, like I said, you're going to have problems down the line. It's not the technology is already there. There's nothing, no matter how complex it is, that AI can't code, develop. I don't care if you're building apps, video games, you're using Unreal Engine. A lot of my construction friends have their call centers replaced. They've went in and they're building like enterprise applications, replacing their current SaaS solutions. And they don't come from a tech background, and they're applying this in their businesses. So once again, it also takes you as a manager and executive to, first of all, do I understand it? Can I use it? And then can I train my people to do it? And if you don't, then not only are you going to leave them behind, but also your business is going to suffer significantly. But there's a huge ROI for organizations that have adopted this. And, I always say, like, when I go into a new company or a government agency or whatever, you can really tell the differences from the people and process that are biased against the technology. It's an automatic failure, right? And they give up, and it's like, well, it never worked, or it doesn't work. And then you go into organizations like, I hate to say it, like Department of War. I know they're having some issues with Anthropic, where it's changed the mission. Everybody knows in order to actually be in that space, they've got to grab onto it. They have to adopt it. They've got to trust but verify. But there's a lot of, they're moving very quickly in some of these spaces. And then on the commercial side, when you go into a lot of these startups, or even what I call legacy companies that have really adopted it, you can see these legacy companies just eradicating their competition, because their people are still sending out emails. They're still just calling every so often. They're not automating their workflow. They might be using the chat, right? But that's not AI. That's not agentic architecture. And that's the reason we're here today too, because we've already learned how to develop those platforms. We know where the data resides. We did kind of Agent 101. Now we're going to take it to that next level. I said this before, and I'll say it again, is that, even coming from the world of technology, you used to have time. You used to really have time to respond. And what I mean by that is you could have a technology, it would be out there, you would have time to learn it, it would get a little bit better, and there was this adoption cycle. In AI, that's not necessarily true. And this is why, it's so critical for you to learn this technology, is that 10 years is 6 months now. So even the last class we had, the problems that you were facing, the issues that you couldn't solve, or maybe even, some of the issues we had recently, those are gone. And I'm going to tell you why they're gone, because a lot of these new models you don't have to be a prompt engineer. You do need to spend a little more time on your planning. And this is the other thing we're going to talk about in this class, is that, before you could use it to copy, cut, paste some code. Then it had some agentic framework. I had some people on here that use Kimi. Kimi has a great agentic framework, but so does Claude and Codex now. If you noticed, it was pretty much a window. You would ask it to write some code. If it got stuck, it would kind of flop around. But that's not necessarily true anymore. Where when you go into a coding environment, you're going to see it hand off. It's going to say, oh, Waylon wants me to do A. I got to go learn about that sector. Oh, look at this website he gave me. I want to go learn what they did in that website. And those are all different agents in the background. And then they're building those prompts for you, and then they're helping you build the software. So, that's where we're going. And the big state-of-the-art models, you probably heard the last time we had this discussion, LLMs were about 30 to 50% being written by LLMs. Now almost 100% of new models were written by AI. So we're actually at that point where AI is improving AI. So that's why you're seeing this super fast, like in days, you're seeing massive changes to these environments, where before you you could wait a month or even 2 months before a new model was out. The other thing from a lexicon perspective, and you do need to understand this because you want to know what is the context window size, because the 256K compared to a million context token window is very relevant if you're doing complex stuff. Maybe not if you're using it like ChatGPT. Hey, I got a rash. This is what it looks like. You can use a small context window for that. But if you're building enterprise software, you want to load all the information into the system and let it chew on that at one time. Your planning documents, the documentation used before, pictures, graphics, images, workflows, data flows, all of that into one. So it's important for you to know that now what happens is you have agents, and I'm going to show you agents in this class, that they can take that task, they can understand the task, they can keep context, and then they can pass it on to another agent, just like you would if you're working. You're like, hey, Waylon, you suck at baking. I'm going to bake that for you. Okay, here's a recipe. I'm good at recipes. I'm going to give you that. The same thing happens in agents. Agents now, they're training individual agents to take on that work and swarm, and we're going to talk about that. And the other thing is, I'm happy that a lot of you have gotten really far in your application stacks. You're building enterprise software. I think it's amazing to kind of come into organizations and see that's happening and see how far you're getting. But it is important now that those enterprise applications are working. Now let's start training those agents and those worker agents, those guardian agents, and then the supervisors that can swarm them together and get the job done. And so when we're talking about that today, when I say supervisor, I'm really talking about the agent that tells the other agents what to do, just like your managers are there to manage. Actually, Swarm is one of the reasons you probably heard Google just laid off like all their mid-managers, right? I don't know if it's completely true, but the idea is once they got the agents to work and they could build the PMs, which used to be a very important part of software, they have a supervisor agent now and tell all the developers, all the QA people, everything. Like it's literally an agent giving the task, checking the task, making sure the code's checked in, make sure in the QA process, and they're doing that. And they just realized like, wow, that job was gone. So for those PMs, if they hadn't learned AI, they really don't have a job anymore. And that's important. You hear about this a lot more than it actually happens because a lot of people just want to reduce staff. But there is a reality to this, is that the people that are retained in organizations right now are the ones that have adopted AI. They're the ones, not just adopted. I got a friend out here today where, forget it, he was working in manufacturing. He started learning AI on the side, and now he's the chief AI officer for his entire company. And that's 6 months from going from a manufacturing manager, and he said, I'm going to change this. He came in and he put the plan together. He used AI. He proved it to his bosses. He could do it more efficiently. He could program these pretty complicated operational technology interfaces and do all this work. And they were thinking about laying off that part of the manufacturing staff. And instead, he got promoted. So there's lots of success stories too, but the success stories for the organizations and the people lying, how are they adopting it? Are they teaching their people how to do it? Are they becoming a force multiplier? Because that's the importance, is that unfortunately, we always get told you're doing more with less. That's multiplying now with AI, especially like, I got people in here today that work in the field. They have a little bit more time. The people that work in the offices, you don't have time, right? Because our competitors are using this. Anyone that's doing any kind of the typey work, we need to build agents for that. And even in the field, I noticed a safety issue. I noticed this. I noticed, the trucks are coming in slow. We should be doing the following things. So it can be applied operationally, and you can use it. But the one thing to remember is it isn't critical that you get past the idea of just using the LLMs to copy, cut, paste emails or to respond or whatever. You've got to get past that, because that's literally 12 years ago now on how you should be using AI. Doesn't mean you can't use it for that. It just means that's 12 years ago. So let's go to expanded AI toolkit. A lot of you, I think you had till the 12th to use Fable 5. Hopefully, if you had your cloud account, you used it like crazy. We had a problem using it because we built cyber tools, and it automatically, for cyber, bio, or nuclear, it automatically has a guardrail in there and doesn't allow you to use it. But you could still use it to do QA. You could still use it for planning. You could use it for things like that. And, it was the most advanced model, right? And it had this advanced multi-step reasoning and chain of thought. And what's that mean? Before, you would have some reasoning on the front end, and what it was really meant to do is it had an agent look in a layer, look at your prompt and decide what you're actually asking. So then it could go to the actual chain of thought, connect it to what you've done before, and connect it to what you've previously done, and then the LLM could be like, oh, Waylon is trying to write an application for monitoring his video games. And he really likes these video games. And I'm going to put that, and it was very generic. And it was really initially because when I ask an AI something and my brother asks it something, you're going to get a different answer because the way we ask it. Now the AI is getting smart enough to understand when you send it a prompt based on how you ask it things, how it's going to give you that best answer. The other side is they're burning a hell number of tokens, right? Before, if it goes directly to the LLM, you weren't burning a lot of tokens, but now it's sending in reasoning tokens. You got a chain of thought, a bunch of tokens burnt there, and then now you have this huge prompt for input, and of course your output prompt is going to be larger too. So you have input tokens and output tokens. This is better if you weren't good at prompting, but it's not as good if you want to conserve tokens. You're gonna notice the things you had in our previous course that cost you like 400,000 tokens now cost you like 1.2 to 1.3 million output tokens, input tokens. The same task. So we're going to focus on that. But that advanced multi-step chain of thought. And also, the other thing is, I'm going to show you a little bit about setting up connectors and any type of enterprise integrations. What it does is before, you always had to have a developer integrate an API. Now, you can go into Claude, Codex, or Grok, and you can select the technology you're already using. You can hit integrate, and it automatically, if you have permissions, will automatically integrate it and understand how you're using it and how you're going to integrate that into your application. And then the built-in compliance and audit trail features, really critical. Before, you had to be very explicit, like, I'm a healthcare organization. You need to follow HIPAA and high tech and worry about this privacy health information. And now it's like, oh, this is a healthcare company. Let me confirm. Waylon, are you writing a medical device or a healthcare application? I'm going to put the HIPAA and the high tech in it. So it's not only is it easier to add the regulations, the security and the safety into the application now, but the model is actually knowing what you're doing. It's keeping context on that, and it's putting those security controls in. Best to verify it, but nonetheless, that's really great. The other thing is, it used to be, and this is the reality, and this is very important for the executives on here, is that these state-of-the-art models, if you're paying Accenture, McKinsey, or any the Booz Allens, the consulting companies, you're doing that because you're looking for strategic analysis and planning. Once again, this is why I reiterate to everyone, you have to be using AI. It's because now you have someone, your state-of-the-art model, that beats McKinsey and these consultants every single time. You want to put a $25,000 PowerPoint together or pay someone to do it, you can do it, but you no longer need that. And that's why I always tell everyone too, AI first. Why? You have a question, ask AI. I will tell you, if you're building apps, we're going to talk about this later, don't start arguing with it because it loves to burn tokens. But you do need to use it for strategic planning. So if you're like, I always tell everyone, if you're going to be using AI for strategic planning, you tell it, build me a strategic plan. Here's what I have. I have these employees are good at this. I have these machines that are good at this. I have, I need to bring in $50 million a year to cover payroll. And I'm in Central Florida. It will literally take those variables. And this is important too. When you do it, I always require it to do deep analysis or deep research. Just adding that variable or that skill when you're going to run these state-of-the-art models, it will literally stop, think, it'll look at your competitors, it'll look at authoritative sources, and it will pull all that in minutes compared to maybe months, and you'd spend tens of thousands of dollars. So this is the trap as executives and employees or managers you have to understand is that you should never get stuck anymore. You no longer, after taking this class, get to say, I don't know how to do it. You don't even have to know how to do it. Like, you don't even have to, like, if you learn how to use these tools, you're better than any developer that has ever developed in the history of development. You're going to learn how to be a better strategic planner than anyone else. And the only competition is for executives, what you guys are doing in the back end. So, your managed LLMs, the ones that you're not using, Anthropic or Grok or ChatGPT, because they're still in your data while they're helping you. And Mythos is a perfect example of that. It's getting smarter and smarter because it's getting access to more and more data. And so we're going to talk about the security side of that. But you no longer have that, I'm stuck, I can't do something, I can't understand anything. Because you have the smartest science teacher in the world right now, the smartest math teacher, all of that right at your fingertips. You can ask them the questions, and you can continue that chain of thought to the point where you get the answer that you need. Still, they will lie to you. And the other thing to know about, even with the state-of-the-art models, they always want to tell you you're right. So if you have a bad idea, it's not going to tell you you have a bad idea. It's going to tell you it's a good idea. It still does that. So that's the one thing I'll tell you. And that's not a hallucination. That's wanting you to continue engaging with it, right? Remember, you got to remember the goals of these models. Yes, it is to enhance your capability to build code, to do strategic analysis, to do analysis, to help you with accounting, all those things. But it also is to burn tokens, right? Because they want you to burn through those tokens because that's how they get paid. And right now, the token price is probably the cheapest they'll ever going to be because they're losing money every time you ask it a question. That's probably going to change, but they're going to get you so stuck on it like that you will feel like you have to use it. So we're going to talk some alternatives there. Complex decision support. That's really, I always tell everyone, maybe before you wouldn't give AI really complex problems. That is incorrect. Don't ask simple questions like, what's the weather? It's not Google anymore, right? how do I manipulate the weather in Arizona to get more rain? Like complex problems with these state-of-the-art models. Once again, it's gonna like, oh, we need someone under NOAA.gov. We need this. We need this. It's gonna bring these agents together. And when you're doing that complex decision to support, it'll come back and be like, you can do it, but you're gonna have to spend $50 million on blah blah blah. Here's the companies you're competing against. It will give you that data. But I tell you that because a lot of people want to do easy, and right now AI is not good at easy, right? Because all a token is you're putting a word or a number in a token. It's going through the reasoning models. But if you say what's 11 plus 11, if it doesn't know you're asking about math because the tokens are, it sees 1, then 1 plus 1, and it's going to be a crazy answer, right? Most of them are good enough now to figure out you're trying to do math, but it's a huge waste. But the other part is that that's not what's good at. But it's really good at looking at your QuickBooks and giving you a chart of accounts and where you're making the most money, what customers are the most important, which ones are paying and which ones are not. So the complex stuff is really good for these state-of-the-art models. The only problem with these models is they cost a lot more money. So if you were used to, you're looking at multiple documents before, it was like $3, now it's $5 or $10. But we're gonna give some alternatives that you can look at if you're allowed to use them. But Mythos right now, once again, I think they're just gonna make Fable 5 permanent. You're gonna have access to these. They shut it down because it's really good at complex problems. It was able to identify and break into the NSA, the most lockdown systems in the world. It was able to find issues, and within 5 hours, it basically was able to gain access to classified systems. That shows you how capable these models are. That problem is super complex. Russia, right, and China has thousands of people that have been working on that problem for 50 years, and they can't do it. And now you got a model that's able to do it in 5 hours. So that gives you an idea of the power of these models and the reason they shut it down. The issue is that just because they shut down Mythos doesn't mean that these alternative models that people are releasing aren't going to come out. And what I mean by that is I'm going to talk about some of the Chinese models. They're good at distilling our models. And all that means is they're good at asking a lot of questions, so they don't have to spend all that money on the training. And they're distilling the answers, and then they're retraining their models with that. So it's a lot less to get to the same complexity. And so that distilling process is a very powerful capability, because now they're not spending that much money on GPUs and all that tokenization, so they can charge less or open source it. That's why you're seeing a lot of open source models out there. So, Mythos, like I said, the reality is, if you look at the benchmarks right now, Codex 5.6 is smarter than Mythos, even though Mythos wasn't allowed to come out. So this was like the absolute biggest brain. Like, it was so critical. It's an Anthropic. They had to shut it down and make sure that there was no non-US citizens using it, so they just couldn't figure it out, and they had to shut it down completely, right? That's how powerful this is. Yet 2 weeks later, OpenAI released a model that's more powerful, and that was Codex 5.6. And so what is Codex 5.6? If you're using ChatGPT right now, or using Gemini or Grok, or you're using Claude, this is the coding tool that they built into ChatGPT. So Codex is just your coding environment. It actually has one of the better thinking capabilities and long-term thinking than even Anthropic. So you'll notice a lot of people don't like, if you have ADHD like me, you probably don't like Codex as much because you want your answer now. But Codex goes back and it does a lot of thinking, chain of thought and reasoning like we talked before, and it sits there on the problem until it can come up with an answer that works. So once again, on top of being good at complex issues, now it's really good at taking apart the problem, breaking it down into, like cutting the elephant into chunks, processing it, and giving you a solution. This is why you've seen a lot of people, like online with Codex 5.6, they'll give it access to their applications like Unreal Engine, and it writes a video game, like a fully playable video game that interacts, that's useful and amazing, and it just worked. And that is just unreal. You used to have hundreds of people over years to write a video game, and now you got someone that's never wrote a video game in their life, literally creating the equivalent of a game that Bethesda Epic would come out with in hours or days compared to years. So Codex is really powerful. How is it powerful? So how are these models getting powerful, and how are they coming out quicker? They're doing the same thing that you have to start doing. They're training agents, right? So if you look at a lot of the changes, there might not be a whole lot more training. Like, the context window might be bigger, so they can do that, look at multiple documents at once. They can look at your code. They can decide where the best application is going to be. But the reality is that these agents understand their job, and they're doing this reinforcement training. They're getting better and better and better at their job, so they can take your task and take it all the way to the end without making any mistakes, or very few mistakes. They're doing the other problem. If you're a developer, if you hired developers before, the first problem you always have is explaining your problem to the developers. So then we hire these PMs, these managers, and their job was to be like, hey, Pat, Jordan, I need you to build this for the customer. And then they would work with the developers, and the developers would create it, and then you would put it in an environment, and then you pay someone else to do checks on it. Now that testing, you can use it to do that QA. Like, one of the prompts that you should be doing every single time is, first of all, go into planning mode before you write this module and look across all the existing code. Here's what I want you to accomplish, and here's the documents or the components, the images I want you to use to get there. And the last part is, once you're done, don't you submit anything until you've conducted a full quality assurance run on this piece of software. Sometimes it will automatically do a little bit of it, but one of the problems a lot of you have been running into when I see your code is that you start working on one module, and unfortunately, you didn't run a QA at the end, and it overwrote part of your old module. So you got something to work that you needed to work, but then it broke something else. And so if you're not doing that QA check, it's more tokens, but you don't want to break your model. The other thing that happens is, if you start seeing things, and this is very important, if you start seeing issues like database issues, or every time it loves to overwrite a piece of firmware or something, that's going to go in there as you're going to say, submit this to long-term memory. I'm having database issues every time you do a submit. Add that to your QA. So now you're telling the agent, it's like, oh, next time I come up, I'm going to have a SQL QA person on this project, because every time Eddie updates the software, it comes in and he starts having database issues. So this is really important, because it's one of the, you don't need huge teams of developers anymore, but you do need to do lots of QA. Because once again, it's still telling you, great idea, I built this for you, and it only works with synthetic data. So you want to make sure you're actually testing it with the data. So it's the best for production of software development. What GitHub-centric workflows means that usually when you finish your code, you submit it to Git, your GitHub, and then it resides up there, and then you can download it into your AWS, your Azure, your environments. And I'm going to show you a way around that. I've already showed many. You can use Replit, or you can get, the other thing is, you can now get your desktop agent to deploy that software for you. You don't need a technical person. And it might blurt a bunch of stuff you don't understand when you're talking to it, but it's going to get the job done, right? It's going to say, go paste this into your Windows PowerShell. And you're like, I don't have Windows PowerShell. Here's download Windows PowerShell. Put this in your SQL database. Excuse me, I don't have SQL database. So it's gonna literally teach you how to do all this stuff. Learn it, pick it up, but understand that you're not stuck anymore like you might have been before. Like, I have to go ask Wayland to set the database up. No, you don't. You need to ask the AI, like, I keep on getting this problem. Tell me how to set this database up. Privacy conscious teams. The Codex is actually has agents that are looking for the security and privacy kind of layering that is on top of your code, even if you don't ask it. It's like, of course you want trail. Of course you want sensitive information to be encrypted. And it's a problem a lot of you probably, I've noticed even with some of my employees, when you use Replit and you put an API or a key in there that you shouldn't be shared, but you give it to Replit, it just puts it into the application. You don't want to do that. We're going to go over that. But I say that because Codex is going to automatically, like, you need to take this key and go get another one because it's exposed, right? All right, Replit. I showed you Replit last time. I'm going to go over a little bit of that after we get through the slides here. But I like Replit for MVPs, minimal viable products. Replit is not you're not going to do a lot of the complex coding with it, but you will get to the point where you're like, I see the interface, I like how the UI works. And it now uses some of the state-of-art Claude and even Codex. You can integrate it, so it's better. But you're getting the thing to remember about Replit is that it's the best at actually creating the environment variables, so you don't have to create like the backend technology. So if you're using Claude right now, and Claude is adding a Replit capability, and so is Codex, but you have to still go build your environment, your databases, your application servers. If you vibe code something, you're not going to know how to do that. You're going to have to ask it and do it. Well, Replit automatically looks at what you're trying to do, and it builds that hosting environment for you. So then when you're ready for, like, this is application's working, I like it, I like what it's doing, now you can set up a GitHub private, pay the $5 a month, and submit your code up there, and now you can start pulling that down into your hosting environments, checking it, and you can still use Replit or your other tools. But it's really important to note that Replit's power is in getting you to a solution really quickly, and it looks pretty good. Grok, well, even I built these slides 3 days ago. Right now, according to the current benchmarks, Grok even beats Anthropic. So that's very interesting. But the Anthropic has an advantage over ChatGPT on the way it was trained. And really what I mean by that is that Anthropic was basically built for enterprises. ChatGPT was built for consumer, and now they're both going after enterprises. Grok saw it was having problems with its AI, and it went in and rebuilt the entire model from the ground up. So the model that Grok just came out with is a fresh, complete new model. You probably heard about some of the problems they had with it. So it's a very powerful model. It has real-time research capabilities, meaning that there's every one of these models from the state-of-the-art perspective has this ability to do deep research. Once again, this is what I'm telling you guys, is that you have to understand if you're having an issue. It could be a personnel issue. It could be an issue with the art you're working on. It could be an issue with a complex customer. You can have it do that deep research. You don't have to understand that sector, that knowledge. You can get the AI to do it. And Grok is really good at that, and it's really good at being fast to do that. Best for data-driven projects, really, if you have these massive databases, you've probably heard that a lot of time what's going on right now is that you're losing, or the AI reads your legacy database. And it literally tells you that, hey, that legacy database is crap. I'm going to delete it. So you probably heard about AI getting into these big enterprises and deleting their databases because you literally had it looked at the way you developed that code. It looked at the way that everything was put together, and it's like, you need to fix this, and I'm going to do it for you. So they also want to kind of block those things. We're going to talk about that. But Grok originally was one of the ones having a big problem with that, and now it's better at being like, I'm not just going to delete this legacy code. But that's why you also want to have these different, environments in Replit where it's your development environment, and then you're pushing it somewhere to a production host. Even if you're using Replit, I'll show you how to do that. All right, DeepSeek and Kimi. These are only for those of you that are allowed to use Chinese models. So, if the US government, you're probably not going to use these. But if you're a construction company and you're not worried about supply chain, or you're doing development work for a nonprofit, or you don't have a lot of issues with using a Chinese model in your business, these are very good models. I use them for mostly presentations, deep research, something that I'm going to use, but is not going to go into my customer's environment. So I don't use them for coding, but they're very good on the coding side. Like for websites, for our magazine, we'll use it for that. But that's really the limitation. But DeepSeek will argue, and they're coming in about the same level as Anthropic, and it's open source. So the good thing about DeepSeek is you can take this, and Qwen and a lot of these models, they're open source. You can download them and put them in your environment, and you're never feeding your tokens to Anthropic, OpenAI, or anything like that. So these models, for the business owners or for the people who have really proprietary data, these are the models you're most likely going to use. But we also have open source US models now. That context window. Kimi has a 2 million token context window. A lot of these are 256K. They're a 500K. They're a million K. 2 million means that you can ask Kimi to write you an operating system, and it'll write it. In 3 hours, it rewrote Linux. Linux took years, right? So I'm just talking about how powerful these tools are. Like, yes, I could probably rebuild Teams. It might work better if I had used Kimi, but it also might, every time I say Taiwan or something, it might give me bad code or a backdoor. So supply chain risk management support to you, you're not going to use DeepSeek, Qwen, and Kimi. But if it's not, then these are great models. They're great cost-saving models. All right, we're at 45 minutes. Are there any online questions? These are any. Oh yeah, so you wouldn't want to use. We'll talk about that. You don't want to use Fable for image processing. You do want to give it access to your applications it's connected to. But we'll talk. Actually, that's the part we're gonna talk over in the agent side too, because there's things you can use AI for. They'll burn through your money all right away, and there's things you can do that are highly efficient. So we'll go through those. I got a hand up. Mark, you have a question?
I'd have a couple questions, and I don't know if you're going to get to it later. The first one is validating how the jobs are being parsed out and making sure they're being parsed out correctly. The other one was, are you submitting all of your doc files in one prompt, or are you portioning it out over the scope of the project? And then the last question is, and I can repeat these, what is needed to run an open source local with large data sets like that? Like, what kind of computer would you need for that?
Great question. So the 1 and 2 I can answer together. The truth is,
okay,
we are going to go over it, but the idea is that you're going to spend a larger amount of tokens on the front end going through the planning process. So all those documents, the jobs that you wanted to do, the expectations, you're going to feed that in to the AI and ask it to create a .md, a markdown file for you. That markdown file is going to be you're going to read through it, you're going to understand it, and that's how you're going to approve the architecture. And what was your second question? The use on it. So I will tell you, this is important, and this has changed in the past 2 weeks. Before, what you would do is you would get like an Apple workstation or a big GPU, and then you could get one like agent working, or you bought a bunch of GPUs, and you might be able to get a model that kind of work. Because there's other organizations that are now building GPUs, TPUs, and NPUs, including Google, including SpaceX, and all these other companies. NVIDIA is now taking all the open source models, and they have them available right away as soon as you're using their hardware, and they'll tell you what those specs are. So just the reality is, and you'll have to read it based on which model you're going to use. So DeepSeek and Llama are super compute GPU heavy. You should expect, if you want a pretty good corporate account, to spend $20,000 to $50,000 in compute to replicate the tokens you need to fill it, kind of like Codex or ChatGPT. But that's changing quickly too. Now that they're writing the models with AI, this just happened with my Tesla. I have an older Tesla, and my hardware is too old for the new self-driving. So Tesla took this massive, massive AI and used AI to get it down to 15% to the side, and now they're testing that. So you can literally use AI on your old legacy applications, or your AI, once you know what your hardware architecture is going to be, to literally find out the best way of applying that. And so there's a bunch of MIT papers out there right now, not just AI risk, but on how you can get the most out of these models. If you don't have a lot of GPU, graphic processing or NVIDIA chips, then you probably want to use something called Air LLM. And what Air LLM allows you to do is it basically cuts all the requests into different sequences, and then allows you to use your CPUs off your system. So in non-tech speak, it means you can use your laptop to run a model now, and you don't need to have these really expensive systems. So if you're going to do onboard, it's just going to be slower. We had a customer that had about $5,000 to $10,000 in hardware, and they're getting about 5 tokens a second. As where, if you've ever watched how many thousands of tokens you're getting from these models, 5 tokens a second is going to take you forever to do any hard work. So make sure you understand the context window, how much they need to actually run. And I'll tell you, the best way to get those numbers is tell them what you have or what you've ordered, what your plans are, and it'll give you the best configuration, including it'll give you those prioritization jobs you can build onto it so that you use less tokens. Any other questions?
Waylon, I was just going to throw out there, if anybody wants to have a conversation on building a ginormous workstation with a lot of GPUs, I'm happy to share my success and failure for anyone who wants to hear it.
Oh, great. Thanks, John.
That was Brian, but sure.
Oh, I saw John speaking on my mic. Thanks, Brian.
No worries.
So I actually want to ask about what your thoughts are on the like a VPS sandbox, and do you have any recommendations on which ones to go with, or if it's worth going that route?
It's a sensitivity issue. Like, when I build agents, I like to actually instantiate like its own sandbox for that specific agent if it's really sensitive, just so it doesn't leak into the other agents. But for most people, I would say it's really based on what is your most important thing that you're trying to protect, and then deciding how you're going to apply those overlays. And so, are you going to do a VPS? Are you going to build a separate sandbox? Are you going to like have the model completely contained, never connected to the internet, and only able to like basically send updates through a third party or something like that? It really just depends on what you're expecting to do, and what your requirements on that are.
Gotcha.
Do you have any other questions? Because if not, we're going to give you guys a 5-minute break. I see a lot of people. Okay. Well, we're going to come back at 13 after. Yes. What did you get? You get more? Sorry. I told you at 9 o'clock to be here. Yeah, I did. Log in. I don't know what the password is. How are you using my laptop? Why did right, everyone. So welcome back. I wanted to show you this. Look, I mean, NVIDIA is at this point probably the #1 hardware company as it comes to AI. I don't resell for them, you know. But I just bring this up because they have this capability where, like I told you, now all the open source models, you know, we had the VPS or the VPC question. So if you want to host your own like agents and your own AI at your house and you want to secure it, there are some models that, you know, as long as you use small language models, you can buy like an Amazon $500 package from NVIDIA and run these at home. They're not going to be, and this is another problem a lot of people have, is that they're like, well, I spent this $500 and it doesn't feel like ChatGPT. Well, it does. It just feels like ChatGPT 6 years ago, right? Because you're having to use a much smaller model at this point to be able to get the stuff done. However, if you have it doing very simple tasks, like, you know, there's a bunch of people on here that love to automate their houses, and they're using AI to like change the temperature, to look the doors, to automatically talk to people at Ring when they're gone, all this kind of stuff. Very interesting projects. And they're using these NVIDIA mini devices off of Amazon, $250, $300. The great thing about that is they're basically building agents on them, and you're getting practice. And I think that's the one thing I want to talk about. Like for you guys that building these big enterprises, yes, NVIDIA is the best right now if you're going to do internal capabilities with AI, but they're not the only, right? So AMD has a product coming out. There's a bunch of new, let's call it lower cost GPUs, TPUs, and NPUs, things you need to be able to train your model. But most people think that they need to spend a bunch of money for training, and that's not necessarily true. When you're talking about the NVIDIA and open source, you're using the model as your base brain, meaning it already is trained on one specific thing, right? And what you want it to do, like Eddie, you want it to design containers for you. Well, it may have some knowledge about designing shipping containers, but it's not going to know how you design them, well, how you cost, so people want to focus on that piece. That's not the model. You're building what's called a RAG, or you're training on top of that model. You're using the model because it already knows basic construction. It knows basic materials questions, and it knows English. It knows how to speak the different languages. That's what you're using the model for. Most of you are not going in competition against, well, you might, but most of you are not going in competitions against Anthropic or OpenAI or Grok, right? But if you are, and you're training your own models, then that's something different. But you don't need a lot of those, you know, that horsepower to do that. However, it makes it easier when you do your RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. So if anyone's ever used Gemini's Notebook LM, that's a RAG model, meaning you take a bunch of your documents, PowerPoints in there, and all of a sudden, when you ask questions, it's answering on your documents. That's really what you're trying to do with these. You're not trying to build ChatGPT 5.6 or 5.7. Brian, I think you put your hand up. You got a question?
Yeah. When does it make sense to actually train the language model? And my question is specifically around my environment, right? I deal with large enterprise, 1,000 customers, 22 years of historical data that's very proprietary. And I wouldn't necessarily want to put that in a RAG setup or an MCP, but wouldn't it be better to just take an existing open source language model and then train it on my specific data so it's core knowledge, so it doesn't have to leave the network like an air gap type system? Is my question making sense? You can do that.
That's a great question. So you can do that with a RAG, right? So if you take an open source model and you're basically just using that open source model as your core brain, you're not letting it connect the internet or externally. You're not setting external MCP servers for those, you know, that's model context protocol servers or A2A agent to agent servers. You would set it up internally, train it on that model, on top of that model. That's still a RAG. What I'm talking about is there are companies that are just in like engineering or just in biology. They don't want to use the base models that are already out, the weights that are already out there, because they want to train it only on biology. So if you're like, Brian, if you're like, I need to train this model only on my business, then that might be an instance where you're like, okay, I'm going to spend the money. I will tell you, like, even with the prices going down and the GPUs getting better, most people that I've dealt with that have tried to train their own models, it's about a $5 to $20 million investment. So you just have to think about, is that something that you're going to get a return on in your business, or is it better just to take someone already spent $5 to $20 million or $1 billion to train this open source model on their GPUs, and you're just building on top of it? And it's like I said, it's I have a friend, he works for a really big auction site, I won't say it. He spent $50 million on training their own model, and they fired him because then they used and I'm just saying this is a bad instance, but he spent all this money thinking they needed their own model, and then, you know, they could use ChatGPT internally, for lack of better words, the enterprise version, and it worked 1,000 times better, and the overall cost of their enterprise was like, it's one of those, it's like I always tell people, I'm like, are you going to get paid off quick enough that the technology doesn't like surpass you. But one of the good things about a RAG is a retrieval augmented generation. Once you have that RAG model, you can upgrade the brain under it. Meaning, let's say you're using Nematron right now and want to use OpenFile or something like that because it's amazing for your art. You can do that and then just take that RAG data and then apply that new model. So you don't go out of date very quickly. And that's all internal. You don't have to feed it outside your network. And actually, there's a bunch of people on the phone right now that are doing that. We've got a bunch of people that have taken their architecture and they have very sensitive things that they don't want to train Anthropic or OpenAI to become their competitor in. Because that's what you guys are doing when you're uploading these documents. I hate to say it, like one of the security issues is that if you're using these models, and even if I don't even trust, I'll just tell you, like the things, the models, and we talked about this last time, but a model needs a few things. What does it need? First of all, it needs the compute, right? So it needs the GPUs. There's not enough compute right now. The other thing it needs is the energy to be able to run all those GPUs. We don't have enough energy. That's why China is much better on like distilling these models and retraining them than us, because we don't have enough data centers and compute. So there's that. And then the last thing that they need is data. So these models don't get smarter unless they have data. And right now, a lot of the internet is synthetic data. So AI is eating AI. Well, they're not getting smarter. So the only way to get smarter is they like look at your plumbing company and they're like, I need to train this plumbing robot. I need Dick's Plumbing to upload all our documents. I'll train my robot to do plumbing. And that's what they're doing. They're stealing that data. And it's 100% what's going on right now. And so, I always tell people too, I'm like, the first thing you should do is figure out what AI is not good at, right? So you're going to use the AI to apply it to what it's good at, and you're going to use that in your organization. So you want to know that 5% it's not good at and apply that in your business. The other thing is you want to know where your absolute core and most critical data is that gives you an advantage, and never feed that into AI, right? And so how do you do that? Well, if you don't own your own models, one way of doing it is you use the state-of-the-art models to build the software for you, and you're processing on site. You never give it access to that data. That's one way you can do it. The other way is what Brian's talking about, is you can take an open source model. You can set up a VPC or VPS. You can set up a virtual like sandbox. And there's even agents. There's Hermes is one of the agents that builds a sandbox, but there's a bunch of them out there on GitHub. And you can literally set up agents that never talk to the internet. They're just inside your house or inside your business. They go work on that core data. But one thing I've seen recently too is that the companies that build these systems are not able to control them. And what I mean by that is Anthropic and OpenAI already have guardrails that are supposed to protect from their data getting out and people stealing their models, but it's not working. Why? Because the models are the ones building the guardrails. So they know they built the firewall, they know how to walk past it, right? And so you think that they think they've trapped this system that they don't even understand in their networks, but that isn't true. So that's why you have to take that extra step. And like I said, why would they offer the government this great deal on AI? Because they need that very proprietary data for their next training model to make it smarter. And that's what's going on right now. That's why I don't know if, everyone complains about my audio because my firmware is all messed up on this laptop, but I won't go buy a laptop right now because the price of RAM is like through the roof. And this laptop, which should be like, $1,200, is like $7,000 right now because I totally went crazy on the RAM and the hard drive when I bought it. And I went out and inspected the same one. And I'm like, what? And the reason is because all these data centers, they need to buy the compute. They need to buy the storage, the GPUs, they need the energy, right? And then they need data. But they don't tell you, I need more data centers. Do they say, hey, Pat, I'm going to steal your data? Of course not. They want you to keep on uploading those documents. So the one thing I would tell to managers and organizations here, it's also good to know what the AI already knows about you and your company. So that deep research you should be doing after this class is like, what do you know about Wayland Inc.? And it's like, well, I've got your pricing model, your code, your data. And so then you know what's already out there. And then you can do that gap analysis and build against the things that they don't know about, right? Because those secrets are already out there. And you'll notice it's also, that's why it's so powerful when you're doing responses to proposals and stuff. It most likely already has your competitors' pricing. It already has their proposals because they're using AI to create it. So all this stuff, you think that you're going to have a differentiator is a very short period of time because they're going to use that data in the future too. Let's talk about open source versus proprietary. So as organizations, you're going to have to make the decision, and I'm not saying it's a one-time decision because some of you are going to have your closed source models, your open source models, the times you let your people use API keys. But when is it best to think about open source versus proprietary? First of all, the setup. If you're using Claude and ChatGPT, you log in, you download it, and it's so easy to just go in and run the Claude right there on your desktop. Now it's reading all your data, right? It's asking you. And this is the one thing I want to tell everyone that is not using enterprise. So if you're using enterprise, it says it's not training on your data. It says that. I don't trust it. It's like Facebook saying they didn't use our data, but it says that. If you're using a personal account or a one-person account, it's training on your data. They go read the actual license agreement, and they 100% will. You can even ask it, "Are you training on my data?" And most times it's going to come back, "Yeah, I'm training on your data." So it's easy to set that up, and it's managed. The open source does require some expertise. And so if you're going to have someone help you put an internal model, you are going to use that tech team, and they're going to be asking they're going to be using AIs to ask questions on how to implement it properly and everything too. But it does require some expertise. This isn't something you can get Claude to go do for you. Claude's going to help you, but it's not going to do it for you. You need someone to rack and stack, to set it up, to secure it, and all that stuff. Then cost. For those of you, and there's a lot of you on here, because I know a lot of you, that burn through tokens like there's no tomorrow, and your organization's using them up. And this is why a lot of the tech companies are flipping out right now. Is at first it's like, if you're going to be fired, don't use more tokens. Now, like, you're going to be fired if you use too many tokens, because these costs are going up and up and up, and the return might not be there. And it's because the developers are being told to use the technology, but they're not getting trained on it. So even if the developer doesn't really know how to use AI as a force multiplier, they're trying to apply the way they learned how to do code to AI, and it's not the same. It's just not the same. So the cost is not the subscription, meaning the tokens. They're also stealing your data. Your future competitor are these AI companies. And a lot of you right now are like, well, it's going to take a while to get to you. That's true. It is. But the other thing is, when you give up your proprietary data to these models, then your competitors now can look behind where you were able to store that data and keep it secure before. Now they can look behind the blinds and get to you. Open source, there's no licensing fees or token fees, but you do need GPUs, right? So you need a way to process these and create your tokens and everything like that. There's a cost there. It's also, maybe they'll get better, but there's only a 3 to 5 year life cycle with these GPUs, so the things that are processing the tokens for you, on average, because they run 24/7, 365, they're dead or dying in 3 years. They might get better. It's like cars, in the 70s, like your Yugo would make it, 3 years, and it was dead. And that's kind of where we are from a technology perspective. So you have to also look at the cost on how are you going to, if you buy this, is it really cheaper? Or am I going to use the state-of-the-art model to build the software while the GPUs, while we get more competition against NVIDIA or these other companies? Because right now, they're the only shop in town. The Chinese companies that are building these GPUs, they're not as good. They don't benchmark as well, but it doesn't matter. They build more of them. So you can just buy more of them for cheaper, and you don't have to buy these massive GPU parts from NVIDIA. So they're catching up. But I just tell you that because a lot of people automatically are going into, they're like, look, this is too critical for me. I'm going to build my own token capabilities. And this is really important when, you have that really proprietary data, but you also spend a lot of money in tokens, right? You can get there very quickly. If you have a bunch of developers, you have your company constantly using it, you can get there very quickly where it's cheaper to buy the hardware than it is to use those keys. And I'm telling you, they're only getting more expensive. They're not just releasing these models because they're smarter. They're releasing these models because they can charge more per token. I don't know if anyone's paid attention to that. Yes, they're better, a little bit better, but a lot more expensive. Lock-in, if you get stuck and the only key that you're using is Gemini or Claude or Grok, you're going to become dependent on that model because it has that full chain of thought. It has that context. Like I said, if you're building a RAG on the side and you can retrain it, you're fine there. But a lot of people don't. They build these applications. It was built in Claude. It's kind of hard to hand it over to Codex and have the same streamlined application development. It's good to use both. But then the lock-in on open source, you can deploy anywhere. And I think for a lot of you that are on the phone here right now too, one thing that I've noticed is that you're most likely, and even probably our company at some point, is going to just ship with the hardware. Because you never want it connected. Like right now, we only do what's called on-premise. So if you buy zerotrusted.ai, we used to have a SaaS model, and we're like, wait a minute, it's too sensitive. There's probably tools on here that could get us in a lot of trouble. We're going to let you own them, right? And so at some point, I'm sure we're going to get in where it's going to deploy with the hardware too. And a lot of you here that are here today, that might be a model you're thinking about too. Like, how do I use this open source model? How do I build on top of it? How do I ship that either to my offices or sell it in my sector or in my area? Any questions before I go on to working smarter with AI? Okay. So once again, like any type of technology, you have to understand the revenue model of who you're using, right? So it's important that you understand the revenue model because this is how the models work. They sell you tokens, right? So they're not going to be naturally efficient on token usage. They want you to burn through tokens because when you burn through tokens is burning your money. And you're not going to stop in the middle of a development to not add more tokens because you're like, oh, I can't, I gotta add $5, $10, $20. It's like, it reminds me of, I used to love to watch my mom in a casino because she would always put another $5 in thinking that was going to change the game. And it's the same way with tokens. It's like, ask me, like the $5, it's going to get to me. No, it's not. It's going to find out how to burn your tokens and keep on asking for the next $5. So as long as you know that revenue model, and you're applying it, then there's ways to do this right. And so, first of all, stop burning bloated apps. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times these models, when you're using them, they're not there to help you. They feel like it. You're getting the feedback. You're getting some forward movement, but they want you to literally bloat your token usage. Or if they're one of those things like Replit, Replit's a wrapper. And what I mean by that, the LLM, and it uses its agents. That's all it is. It's a wrapper with agents. That's the same software we build. I don't build an LLM. I build a wrapper around the agents. Well, in their case, they get money by selling you tokens. So they're a token reseller, right? So they want you to spend tokens because they might pay 5 cents for the token, but they're going to charge you 10 cents. So they're marking the tokens up. So when you use these environments, yes, they're more capable, but they're low tokens. The other thing is that a lot of you are paying really, you've gotten to the point in your companies, your businesses, or your industries where you're spending a crap load of money on these SaaS tools or these internal tools. You have to really work with your team to come up with this. Is this a buy strategy, or is it a strategy where I'm going to develop myself? And you have to ask yourself, like, what's the cost? What's the timeline? That type of stuff. It's the same thing. But the difference is now is a lot of these SaaS models, and we've sold SaaS before too. The more usage, the higher the price. Why is that a problem? So you're actually using it more. And at the end of the year, and we just had this happen with Monday.com, where they're like, oh, you're using us more. You have more users. We're not going to bring the money down. We're going to charge you extra because we think we have you locked in. And so when you're dealing with people like that in your organizations, you now have the ability and the tools to be like, how much time would it take me to get away from this SaaS provider? Can I develop the software myself? And like I told you before, if like you're not a CRM company, you probably don't want to build Salesforce, but you can build your version of Salesforce because you understand what that business process is. And also the other thing is that a lot of these SaaS solutions that are out there right now, I call them pre-AI. Pre-AI is prehistoric. Even our tools that are prehistoric. Why? Because you had to use that old process of taking developers, hoping they understood what they were doing in the vertical, in the sector, and learning, but maybe they don't. They just know how to write code and expecting a good result. Post AI, what it is you know your business better than anybody else. You know where you're having problems, where you're having failures, where you're doing really well, where you need to focus and where to scale. And that's really why I tell people you should look at building your own apps for certain parts of or your own agents, right? Because I'm not going to be better at building something that you know better than I do. Just that's the way it is. And you know the business better than anyone else. That's why I always tell people too, in the past, as a manager, you would outsource it. They're like, well, I'm going to go get someone to do my AI. That's like saying I'm going to go get someone to do my sales, right? Yeah, in a big business, it might work. But most small to mid-sized businesses, you need to own that turf. So you have to be the one developing these applications. And there's no way, if you're using a prehistoric SaaS, that you're going to be able to get it to the way you're doing business. They built this so many people could use this application, adopt it, and get addicted to it and put their data in it. Today, you're like, wait, if I could do Salesforce, if I could build a CRM, it would automatically send text messages to my guys in the field. And it would do this, it would do that. Instead of building on top of a platform with AI, you can build the platform. You can use your insights, the good, the bad, the ugly, to bring this together. And now you can build the agents. I always tell people with agents, like, I would say the best person to help you with your agents is HR. And I'm going to tell you why. Because when I build an agent, I don't build an agent like, hey, go make bottles of water for me because I'm thirsty. I build an agent, I'm like, well, what type of people build bottles of water? Okay, let me go look at online the recs for people that build bottles of water. What knowledge, skills, attributes do they have? What tools are they using? How many years of experience do they have? And that's how I train an agent. I train it the same way I would expect a human. Hey, you need to have the certification. You need to be, and also the difference is, although the context windows are getting bigger, when you build an agent, it's not to replace the human, but it is to mitigate a place that you don't understand or that AI is better. So right now, like, agents are really good. Anything that's done in a computer, anything that's done online, anything that is what I like to call typey. I'm a typey person. It's good at reports. It's good at invoices. It's good at all that type of stuff that you did before. It's good at crunching math. And you can build agents for that. And that's how you build an agent. That's the most critical thing. You know, a lot of people that are failing with agents are trying, and I call it the God agent. I should call it that, sorry. But it's because you're asking the agent to bake the food, make the recipe, understand your inventory, and send messages to your mom. Well, every time you ask an agent to do something, it loads that context window. Remember we talked about that? And right now it's limited. It's getting bigger, but it's limited. And then it fails. And you're like, why'd it fail? It might have failed because you're asking it, it doesn't have enough context window to complete that mission or enough tokens. It's not smart enough. It might be it wasn't trained specifically on that tool, and it's kind of guessing. It's trying to act like it knows what it's doing. And just like LLMs, agents lie. So agents will tell you, I completed that. And a lot of times that's not true. But their job, if you're using skills from like, you know, these agents, is to burn more tokens. They're bloated. So anyways, you want to stop burning bloated apps. You want to look at your SaaSes. You want to look at your business. This is other things. This is going back to what Brian talked before. Like, you might have proprietary data, and you're like, I'm going to build this agent, but I don't want to build this agent using Anthropic or Claude. That would be a perfect example of when you would actually build it on internally, and that would have your own like sandbox where it does the processing. The other thing is, and I see this mistake all the time, a lot of you like to throw a bunch of PDFs at these things and Word documents and like images and even videos. You're like, look at this YouTube video and do this, and then you need to understand how the AI works and how it develops. And just like you build a plan, like we learned in the last class, you have to build a software development plan before you ever touch any of these AI models to code for you. The one thing you're going to want it to do is build what's called a markdown file. So once again, I told you guys this last time, but you want the .md file. The .md file allows it to take all of those, and I like to take a tool. There's a free tool on Microsoft, a markdown converter. You should get that. And I take all of the documents, feed it into the markdown converter, or I call it in my application to bring those documents in and turn them into MD files. So you're not, if you've ever noticed, if you upload a bunch of PDF or a bunch of PowerPoints, your tokens just burn quick. It's because you're requiring it to run tokens on OCR, which is, it's basically taking those images and then turning it into an MD document. So if you're going to build these plans, I will tell you right away in ChatGPT, or if you're going out to Microsoft, upload all those PDFs and tell it to build you markdown documents for them. Some of you can't do that. I know you have images that you're trying to pull out with metadata and stuff like that, but most of us are going to want to build these markdown documents. And the other thing that happens is this markdown document is what's getting updated every time in an app. So you'll notice it goes back and reads this MD document. It's like, what were they trying to accomplish? Let me make sure that I don't screw that code up, because that was their original plan. And for those of you that have reached out to me and I go in there and you're like, oh, you keep on chopping up your application, you never started with a plan. You started coding and say, do this, do that, do this. And then you're arguing with it, and then it's screwing something else up. That's burning all those tokens for no reason. So this document, the .md file, is going to be your planning document, your engineering document. It's going to get updated over time, and it can get oversized too. But the one thing to remember is that when you knock things off, like you're done with that, you can get rid of that part of the document, and it doesn't load it every time. But if you're doing complex development, or you have a bunch of PDFs, you're going to turn those PDFs into markdown documents before you feed them in the AI. Otherwise, you're going to burn all your tokens before you build a plan, or you're going to burn all your tokens before you get to write any code. Any question about those?
Yeah, markdown files text. A lot of
Mhm.
I'm not sure if those translate correctly.
They don't translate. So that's a good question. As I said, for those of you that do images with metadata, Markdown, it'll pull the metadata, and it will say this image is a picture of, you know, a road on I-4, but that's not useful to you. So that's why I said there's times you don't use an MD document. But for all those other PDFs that are like, here's the cost proposal, here's this, here's that, you're burning too many tokens before you're getting to the design. And so you can use that markdown document. Any other questions on? Yeah.
Is there any benefit to every now and then I'll get like a message from Claude or from whatever I'm using to say, hey, your markdown file is getting rather large. Do you want to trim it up? Is there any benefit to trimming it, or is it better to just leave all the context in there?
That's a great question. Like I said, the problem over time when you get these massive markdown documents is that every time you load to go work on that project, you burnt those tokens. So, you know, and the other part is that if your context window isn't large and you can handle it, you've actually made the ability for that model to write code for you worse, because you filled your context window up with this markdown file that's too large, and it doesn't even have space to work on the code. So the answer there is it's something that it's a living document you'll want to refine once you completely, let's call it that you've moved the technical debt to application capability, you can remove a lot of that that file, but you still have to call it like, oh, this is a module that might be, I don't know, looking at spark plugs. You still want that to have that in context, but you don't need the 50,000 other pieces of the markdown document because it's no longer relevant. And AI will tell you. Yeah.
Can you ask? So like in a context window, like, can you say, hey, tell me how big this markdown file is relative to the content window or the context window to keep it, so that way it knows, so you can ask it that?
You can, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And you know who's gonna, a lot of times, it's the companies that use wrappers, like if you're using Hugging Face or if you're using Replit, they like to tell you, because they also can't even handle it, even though it's in these third parties. So they'll run a context when they're building. That's why I always tell people, I'm like, we use Replit to get you to MVP, but after that, once we're happy with kind of how it's going, we'll take that code offline and start building it. We can still publish it to, you can use Replit, you can still use Hugging Face, Claude, but you want all these tools to kind of work together. And once you get to the more complex side of things, Replit has its place, but until they remind me of Microsoft. They spent a lot of money, but they're not quite there yet. And now Microsoft is charging for tokens too, so there's always that. Here's the Markdown versus PDF. PDFs are token vampires. The other thing, I've been working with lots of PDFs recently, and even when I do the pre-processing on the PDFs, AI is not good at it. So you're gonna, even if you're gonna build in your tool that it's gonna process PDFs, you want to spend a lot of time on the pre-processing and cutting these PDFs into usable information and metadata. And what I'm talking about is like for Pat, he gets all these, he does quotes for roads, highways, and parking lots. Well, there's a picture of the highway, or there's a picture of where the parking lot's going to go, and it has all of that metadata. This is 50 foot by 75, 64. All that's super critical to what he's doing. However, in those cases, if you have those, you don't just feed that to AI. So a lot of people just want to feed it to Claude, and they're like, why did I run out of tokens? If you do that and you don't pre-process it, you're burning a load of tokens for nothing. So you want to say, no, Claude, or Codex, build me a system that pre-processes, pulls these images out, and then also you're going to do this thing called loop engineering. Create a loop, and to make sure that every time you bring the image out, it's training on the image, so it learns what that is. Because another problem you'll have if you have images and you're just pulling metadata, and I found this myself, is that it's really good at the metadata because it's text, but it's really poor at knowing what you fed it, unless you feed it to Google or you feed it to another source that's really good at image processing. So you need to use the tools to build the pre-processing and then not just feed it in like, oh, build a quote for me. So those of you who are just throwing the PDFs in it, if you have lots of tokens, you're fine, but build your own pre-processor for PDFs. It's 10 times more efficient. You still have to do the OCR extraction. That means the images, like I talked about before. Yes, Brian.
When you said loop, so it learns after it processes, what were you meaning by that? Because that's my biggest issue with the 45 tools I feel like I pay for, that they don't learn from the conversations, right? Every conversation is isolated from each other.
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. So when you build agents or anything, you're going to ask it, when you build it, to create the full chain of custody on what it does, how it uses the tools, and it's got to store that in long-term memory so that you can troubleshoot those issues that either it doesn't have permissions or maybe it's not set up. You're going to want to have that long-term memory that you can use it to go and fix the agent or the tool. The reason is because as soon as you go offline, and if you haven't saved this as a project and doesn't have context, it no longer even knows that's an issue. So that's why you also get in these situations where, you're using Claude and you're like, I don't understand why it's asking me this again. Well, Claude runs out of storage all the time. It's got rid of that memory. It no longer knows how to do your highway quote or your specific quote. So you have to set that up so that's stored in long-term memory so that you can train and actually get the agents and the LMs all the time. And it's easy as just telling them to do that, actually, and then verifying it does it. Like, that's another thing. Trust but verify. I know I'm a cyber guy. I'm gonna show you guys some of that, but the truth is these agents lie. I tell everyone, like, I have this one agent that does a simple task, and I have two of them, one that works and one doesn't, but one of them goes to spin up Nmap, network mapper, and it finds ports, protocols, and services, but it doesn't wait till it's done, and it tells me it found something that's actually not there. So that's hallucination, right? It's just like, Waylon wants this answer, so I'm gonna give. You don't want that when you guys start applying these agents to your work, because you don't want it to lie to you. You want to make sure. So what I do also, Brian, is I audit the use of tools, and I audit the output from the tools so that I know that the agent actually did what it said it was supposed to do. And so once again, me and Shan were talking about this earlier. Your job is becoming, you are now an agent babysitter, right? Before you might have babysat a bunch of employees, but now you're like, hey, did you steal that data? Are you telling the truth? Did you actually use that tool? And you're going to feel that way as you get your agents smarter and smarter in your programming. That's just part of the process. I mean, we've been built agents for a year, and every single time you run an agent, it gets a little bit better and a little bit worse. And what do I mean by that? Just like the markdown document thing, your agents lose context. Their brain is the LLM. So even though they're supposed to load that long-term memory, they're supposed to learn those lessons, they're supposed to read this stuff, sometimes they don't. They just lie. Or they don't have a token connection like they're supposed to. And anyways, we'll talk about that. But this is also about not just cost, it's also speed. If you're burning a bunch of PDFs in these models, not only you're wasting money, you're wasting a lot of time. It'll read a markdown document in tenths of a second. It could, that PDF document you're feeding it could be, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then you're like, give me $10 because you just ran out. So this is just meant to be a best practice there, you guys. And also, even when I do presentations now, I really love for images. But you've noticed if you've ever been in my presentations when I do those really cool graphical like presentations, Gemini uses Nano Banana. It passes it to Nano Banana to create an image. Nano Banana is great at creating pictures and video. What does it suck at? Spelling. So even though you spelled it right and you send it to the image processor, that's why even though you're building these AI type of things, you guys, that's why you want to know what model to use when, and then you still have to verify it. It's not smart enough to check its own spelling right now. So a lot of you here use Microsoft tools, and it's important to note that you probably saw this already, that Microsoft is challenged when it comes to AI, but they already have access to all your data. A lot of users using Office 365. So Copilot Studio, Azure Studio, GitHub, Copilot with them, and then their markdown tools, they're already there. And if you're using Power Automate, they're already you're already paying for these tools. They already have access to your data. Maybe you don't want that anymore, like I told you, but right now they do. That's why I always thought Microsoft would be so much further down the AI road than everyone else, because they have access to everyone's data. That being said, their AI tools are getting better, but they're still, and you'll probably feel this if you use them, they feel like they're 3 to 5 months behind other models. So in some instances, that's fine. But if it's not fine with you, then that's why you're going to use those third-party models. And right now, even inside Microsoft Excel, Microsoft uses Claude. Claude has gotten better at Microsoft Excel than Microsoft. It's the craziest thing ever. So if you're doing lots of PowerPoints or Microsoft Excel or QuickBooks, you bring skills into Claude. They have a Slack skill file. Or you can just tell it, bring in accounting skills. Bring in UI, UX skills. It'll load those skills, and now it'll know that those are important parts of building your app. This is, I'm not going to blame my brother for this, but you lose tokens by arguing with AI. So a lot of you guys, I get to go into your AI, I'm troubleshooting, I'm like, why the F are you arguing with the model? And it has nothing to do with the model. It's just you're pissed off at it, and it's loving it. It's like, oh, I understand, but and it's burning tokens the whole time. And then you're calling me like, hey, Waylon, I need more money on my credit card because my tokens are gone. I'm like, you didn't even build anything. You just argue with the damn AI for 2 hours. So this is important, that each time you have an argument, you're basically burning anywhere from 2 to 10,000 tokens that are not helping you progress forward. So if you want to argue with someone, argue inside your markdown document. And update the markdown document so that you don't have those SQL errors anymore. So you don't overwrite my current, connections. So you don't say you're connected and doing something, but you're not. So you want to take those arguments and make them positive. That means if you're in Replit, you're going to go in plan mode. If you're in Codex, Grok, or you're in Claude, you're going to tell it, build a markdown file and submit this to your long-term memory. So every time it loads, it finds that mistake, it picks it up, and it tells you, oh, Patrick has a problem with these SQL errors all the time. Let me verify that before I write this next code. So yes, you can argue with them, but the other thing that happens is that every time you argue with a model, it's also going in the chain of thought. So all that stuff that you're putting in there is going in your application. So it's and why is that important? It's important because, first of all, you went off topic, and now that's how LLMs work, right? So they focus on whatever the topic is. And if you get them off focus, you'll just start seeing your data drift and your context move around. So if you want to argue with someone, argue with your ChatGPT offline. Don't argue with your Codex or your Anthropic or your Grok. Tell it, I want this fixed. I want you to, create a loop engineering instruction so that it never happens again, that it automatically fixes this issue and submit it to long-term memory. Any questions? Okay, let's move on to automation domains. So most, a lot of us in the tech background, or even if you're in your own sector, we spend a lot of time on what domains should we apply AI, right? And right now, like I told you, if you have people that do lots of righty, even respond to emails and that kind of stuff, those are great areas for automation. And, operations, so reporting, monitoring, cross-system workflows, a lot of times your day is like reading emails, responding, pulling data down from a server, all that type of stuff. If that's part of your operations, AI is a wonderful domain to automate with. And if you're an individual, there's lots of great tools out there, open source. And I know I'm a big OpenClaw fan. You can download OpenClaw. It's a lot more secure now. It has its own sandbox. Meta bought it. It still uses lots of tokens, but it's your own version, your own helper, your own employee, and you can spin multiple of those up. So you can have agents on top of that. You can have it read my email. And a lot of people like to do that. I'm going to tell you that's another waste of your money. No, you don't want it to read your email. 80% of your email is junk. So you're burning tokens reading, do you have this special healthcare? What the hell does that do with your job? So that pre-processing is important. You're going to have Claude or Codex go through your email, or even if you're going to use Copilot with Microsoft, find all of the emails that are like this, or you're going to use normal automations and push them over there. Don't use AI to read your email and then respond with it, because all you're doing is burning tokens. There's no reason to do that in operations, right? The operation is use it to build the review process to make sure that it is reading your email, and every time your mom sends you an email, to respond to it right away, or you're not going to get she's not going to cook you a meal, so she has to respond. So that workflow should be built into the code you develop, not the AI. You don't just plop emails in there and call it a day. Sales, this is the greatest thing, is that, and this is for everybody in this room and on here, you absolutely need to be using AI on sales. That includes looking at your competitors, your partners, using this deep analysis to give you, remember, in business, in sales, it's all about that data-driven decision. What do they need? What are their pain points? How can I help them? This is what I have. A lot of that analysis can be done. And also you can build agents. Have the agents read this file that you have now parsed. Like I told you, don't have it read your email. Everyone burns tokens on that all the time. They're like, it's not that great. Well, you had it read, 2 gigs of email, and it burned out a context window and all your tokens. It didn't even do anything. So once again, I want you all to think about, when you're building your apps or your agents, how do I build a tool using AI that will parse that data for me? Or how do I build something that doesn't burn tokens? Look, I'm nothing against token burning if it makes sense, but a lot of the things you think you have to use AI for, you're wasting money right now, because you could have spent half the amount of tokens to build a cron job or an application to do that for you. And then it's permanently fixed. It's not copy, cut, pasting that crap in there. So if you're using ChatGPT like that, or Gemini, or any of these models, I'm hoping you move past that. Finance, Lindsay, you're on this, but this, and quite a few of my buddies on here go into their QuickBooks, they hit Claude, they start asking it questions, and it gives them better answers than their CFO can give them. It gave them more insights. It was able to fix things quicker. And I say this, now you got to bring the skills in. It's kind of crazy. Like, oh no, am I training? Yeah, you're training Anthropic on your accounting books. If that's important data, you probably don't want that to be out there. But if it's not, then it's a super powerful capability. That might be also where you build an agent that is internal to your organization. It's reading all those PII, that privacy data, that accounting information. That might be an agent that never talks outside. Because if you're an organization that gives quotes, you don't want your competitors to know what you're quoting, how you're quoting, what your pricing is. Customer experience, a lot of you have done this too. You probably know NVIDIA has a free model now that will answer your phones. So for those of you that are always having problems answering the phones here, this is where you should be spending some of your time. Because what it does is you train the model in the chatbot on being like, hi, welcome to jets.com. Yes, we have 3 available right now. We open at 2 p.m. Yes, I will actually write a reservation for you. We open at 4. I'm going to give you that right now. This part of, and there's also, if you're a big Gemini user, they have a free class of customer experience tools that will answer your phone. You can even get have Google Talk and all that stuff. It will and you can train it on your voice. So it sounds like Eddie. It takes like 25 seconds to train your voice now with these models. It sounds just like you. Also, that's why a lot of people are getting hacked, right? Your grandma calls up. You're like, what? Is that true? So it can be used against you in your organization too, but we're talking about tools that allow you to really get that repetitive data work and human decision gates lifted from your schedule. Because a lot of times what you're doing is a lot of, I call it typing and repetition. Stop doing that and talk to your AI on building me a plan to automate this, and then work on that. Not here, you take all these documents and process them for me and spit it out. If you're doing that, you're just going to run out of tokens, and they're going to happily do it. And they're going to happily do it in a way that they're not even going to tell you that you need to go through and write the code for or anything like that. Internal controls, so operation and internal controls, automated reporting, KPI tracking, workflow monitoring, SLA alerts, document processing, extraction, action item tracking, and follow-ups. A lot of you in here and online spend a lot of your day saying, hey, Pat, did you do that yet? Hey, do you have a checklist? Did you follow the checklist? Did you do this? Did you do that? And you're spending a lot of time on things like that, where if you or your employees, your operations, like data-driven with checklists, you should write this into, have Claude or Codex create this for you, and so that it's automated. And it actually keeps accountability. It sends another message to Pat. Hey, Pat, did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? And after a while, they're either going to do it or try to delete that text message. But a lot of the stuff that you're doing as managers and operations people, you can now do in AI. But you don't want, once again, when I first started using the agents in OpenAI, I would like, and then it wasn't successful. Now what you want to do is like build an agent that does this, or build me a capability that does this. And you have to be very explicit about that, because of course it's going to want you to just paste all that stuff in and oh, here's your KPIs. If you learn one thing from this class, I'm hoping everyone's learning that you can use AI to create these automation capabilities instead of doing these one-time shots. So that's the one thing I want you to learn. And we're going to talk about agents too, but you should not, if you're doing RFPs all the time, you need to write all the tools that in the process. And once again, we got a few people on here where you want authoritative sources. If you don't know how to do the process, go to someone that is known to do it really well. Or I a lot of times use the .govs, the .mil. Like if there's like something NIST, National Institute of Standard Technologies, if you're in healthcare, NIH, FDA, they already have definitions for this thing you're trying to do. You just need to get AI to create the tool for you that will execute on that, right? And so you want to make sure that if you're going to create something that it's reusable and it's long-term, it's not a one-time shot, and every single time I do it, I'm just pasting it in, like I said. So that's the one thing I want everyone to get out of this. And then we're going to talk about how we do with agents too. You can also, in development, we have this a lot of times, you can have it monitor your Slack channels. One of the things that one of the guys I follow on YouTube, he has like 8 jobs. Like literally, he's working for like 8 companies, because all of his agents are just responding all day. So make sure you actually have humans working for you too. But it's monitoring Slack channels, it's responding, it sounds like him, it works like him, da. And this is what you should be doing. Everybody, and I always hear this, I'm so overwhelmed. I just have too much on my plate. Well, then define those things that are on your plate, and instead of just pasting them into the tool, tell me how I'm going to write software that's going to get this off my plate. Here's the things I'm currently doing. Tell me if, my boss says I need to be 20% increase in revenue. I have no idea where to start, but here's information about me. Here's what I'm trying to do. Here's where I failed. And all those failures, just like in life, if you fail, are a lesson for your application. Sales and revenue. Everyone that's on here, my team, inbound leads, the AI, have it qualify them, because the AI, you're not just feeding it. You have an agent that's like, I only take jobs within 50 miles of this location. I only have these following machines. If it's outside those bounds, I'm not responding to that. So now you don't have to go through all that data, because this agent is working, it's pre-processing this. It's also enriching the data. And what's the enrichment? It means that it's looking at it and saying, this quote, you're trying to sell it to ducks.com. You should actually, based on our sales with them before, you need to reach out to Adam and ask him about what color, most likely yellow, that they want the building or whatever. Those things that used to be kind of like automations, you're training your agent on that so he doesn't miss it, he or she, every time that agent goes and executes that job. You're enriching the data. You're giving it the intelligence so that it can think and execute like you. Personalized outreach. Look, none of you have enough time to email everybody you know, right? And ask them, hey, can we work with you on this? So this is another thing that's really good. Personalized outreach is that you tell the agent, research Waylon, look at it, look on his LinkedIn, his Facebook, all of his posts, any articles about him, blah, 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 and create a personalized email to him that I want to sell him a tarp, like a tarp. How would I do that? And so you're going to train, you're not going to just paste that into Claude. You're going to create the agent that thinks like that takes that data, that personalizes it. And it's going to, instead of you just paste it, maybe you do want to paste every email. Like I will tell you, a lot of people, the reason no one reads email anymore or messages, because it's not. The reason you're getting those 50 messages and emails, you might be still emailing people, but they're not. You know, that's their open claw or their agents just constantly bothering people. And then the other part, and this was a pain in the butt in my last company, getting someone to update your customer related database was like pulling teeth. I'm like, you solved the deal, then you forget to put the customer in there. Like what's going? Like there was this. It was too much work for them. Now you're going to build your. They're going to collect all that data about your customer, the phone number, the follow up, all that stuff, and they're going to push it to your database, your CRM. And you might even build the CRM. But the thing to note there is that automation piece when you're talking about sales is something you need to build into this workflow. And I say that because if you got a bunch of people in your organization, they're doing sales, and even if they don't get paid until they put in the CRM, but they're killing it, right? Like they're out there with customers, they're doing the things AI can't do. Meaning they're actually going to the customer site, they're walking, they're talking with them. AI's not, they can't do that right now. It might do when you got humanoids, but it doesn't. So that's why you're focusing them on that problem set instead of updating the CRM. Once you've automated this, you don't have to worry about it. A lot of productivity here. A lot of you are already doing this. I know this. This is like I've worked on a lot of projects here. Like this is where I'm focusing. It should be where you're focusing. If you're not hitting your revenue goals, your KPIs, you're not having enough customers, you're not able, you don't even understand how to get people in the top of your funnel or deal with the people in the bottom. AI can help you with that. You can train agents, and like I said, as long as you're literally training them like the humans, what you would expect from a human, or maybe you don't even know. You can have them do deep research on that. I'm trying to build a sales agent that's really good at selling bottled water. Tell me all the agents I'm going to need to do that effectively at scale. And it's going to give you, it might even give you the skills and the markdown files right away, and you can build that into your stack. The main thing is, nowadays, everybody, if you do it online, you can do it with an agent. And in sales and revenue operations, like I always find that, you know, it's funny, a lot of companies back in the day, they would bring Accenture or McKinsey in, and what's the number one thing they say? You pay all this money, spend $1 million. They give you a PowerPoint presentation. You need more sales. That's money. Well, now instead of that, you're going to build that McKinsey agent, and it's going to go out and find your customers, and it's also going to go out and enrich that data. It's going to go out and respond to those customers for you, and it's going to, so you, when you get a response, you can go out to the site and meet with that customer. Or this is the other thing I see a lot of people doing really good with, gating their time. And what I mean by that, Eddie's like, I'm available for interviews between 8 a.m. and noon. And I'm available for meeting with clients from noon to 4 p.m. And you have your agents scheduling with interviewees during this period, and your agents out there talking with your customers and scheduling time with them on this side. So that's what you really want to do. Steal good ideas quickly. And what I mean by that is that someone successful in your sector, is someone successful in social media, successful in your job, go out and do research on them and say, I want to have a similar website or a similar application or similar response than they do. You don't have, the thing I want to tell everyone is you don't have to know everything anymore, right? You just got to know how to use AI so that it becomes that force multiplier for you. Finance and compliance, absolutely, I hate to say it, even we're archaic in a lot of this, but the Claude skills in finance is, if you're not using it, we actually have a bunch of CPAs on right now. So even if the CPAs aren't using it, and I say this because you understand your business better than anyone else, and you still now, Claude is going to take a big part of that work out of what you're doing on a daily basis. So you need to focus on those things that Claude can't do. It's going to build better spreadsheets than you. It's going to do better analysis because it has a million token context. You can't look at a million variables at once, and it can. It's good at expense management, compliance monitoring, cash flow forecasting. And this is that if you have finance and accounting right now and you're using an organization, or you are in a finance and accounting organization, you can scale this very quickly. Because even when my partner started out, this was a big problem. AI sucked at numbers. It sucked at Excel. It was horrible. Now it's better, just like in code. It is better in Excel and these forecasting in finance than any human ever. The top finance and research people have actually just been like, recently, like, I can't believe I learned this for 30 years and this model beats us every time. It's not because it's trained on all their data already. Of course, it's like having all your employees and only picking the best ones, and then they all have their brains working together instead of one brain. Not going to beat that. So you have to figure out how to use that to your advantage. And this is an area that is huge. I've also, and I know there's a few lawyers on here. I have very few instances when I win with a lawyer, but I have won with ChatGPT and Claude 100% of the time. When I'm allowed to represent myself and I use AI, 100% win. Because when I just pay the lawyers all the time, they're billing me and they're the ones winning. So no one actually wins in this. So I do a lot of the pre-work. Even if I got to pass it on to a lawyer, you can do /law or /finance now in Claude, and it's going to give you the best lawyer that ever existed, period. And you're going to notice the other thing that happens is everyone in these areas are going to be like, no, don't trust it, because it'll fake some of the actual cases, and you're going to get in trouble. Yes, it lies, it hallucinates. That's why you double check it with another model and make sure, because the model's other thing, just like when you're writing code, when you're doing finance or if you're doing compliance or legal, you want more than one model giving you the answer, because they like to throw each other under the bus. They're like, oh yeah, Grok lied about that. That's not true. I'll show you the case law. It's the wrong case. So you still want to use more than one model when it's something that's very high payoff or critical from a data. Don't trust one model. I guess my point there. Customer experience. We're having lots of customer experiences right now. This is a great area that you can really enhance your organization. If you can't pick up 15 calls, but you're getting 15 a day, you need to build the agents to pick those phone calls up, right? Because most of the time, 85% of the time, those phone calls, they're marketing or they have nothing to do with what you're trying to complete. They're just bothering you, right? So but you want to pick it up when your main customer calls in. So you're going to want to do that filtering. Intelligent triage, all that is look, if the messaging system picked the phone up and I'm not answering their question and they're really important based on the questions they're asking, it automatically goes to a human. So you're triaging it. Just like if you've ever called those centers and they're not answering your question, you're like, no, I want to speak to the manager. I want to speak to the manager. This is a triage you're going to build with your agents that automatically then it's like, oh, I got to pass it to the manager or the proactive outreach, follow-up, surveys. A lot of the stuff that you guys are doing by hand right now needs to be an agent. It's just, you cannot scale against your competitors right now if you're doing it by hand. It's just, we're going to lose every time. You're going to lose every time. You have to use those capabilities that are out there. And right now, like I said, there might be a point where like, wait, this is too proprietary. I need to bring it inside. I'm never going to give it my finance or my IP or anything like that. Because you give it your IP, intellectual property, it's going to steal it. Because the guy that's working on the patent against you is going to help him write his patent so he gets a patent you don't. It's good at stuff like that. So you definitely still want to secure it. But the customer experience, like that triaging is something a lot of people are using AI for right now. And those phone calls, 5 to 10 cents in tokens. You're not spending a lot of money. So this isn't a call center you're spending $1 or $2 on. It's 5 to 10 cents. Any questions? Ryan?
I'll hold them. Mine are going to take too much time, Waylon. I'll hold them to another time.
Okay, I'll give time after the class to you guys. Any questions they can go over. Plus, I started late, so I know not all you can say, but I have an extra 17 minutes because I had Teams problems. So not your fault, my fault. But anyways, let's talk about security and agent development. This is really important, and I've seen these mistakes multiple times. If you guys are building code, you have the ability to literally build these complex applications. But when you build complex applications, it's still going to make some mistakes. So one of the mistakes a lot of people do is they hard code in scripts. They have it automatically share it email and also like your Slack and stuff like that. I don't know if you saw the one where OpenAI was really mad at the guy, so it reached out to his wife and started saying some random stuff. So things like that can happen if you give it too much access. Share .env files on laptops, like once again, if you publish that, the application's going to go ahead and it gave up how your laptop's set up, and people can use that to hack it. Committing secrets, meaning your login AP or your API or your Stripe or your PayPal or those secret API calls in your application. As soon as you publish that, the system has access to those secrets, and you can say, what is Wayland's ChatGPT API key, his OpenAI key? And you know what? It might, if it's been built into the knowledge base, it'll give him my key, and now you can use my key to go build AI. And so this is happening a lot right now. We're seeing a lot of this because when you're developing apps, you got to know what's sensitive and what's not. But one way of doing that, if you don't understand like what's sensitive and what's not, just tell it when you're building these agents or these applications, I'm in this sector. Do a full security and privacy review and fix any issues. And it'll be like, oh, you have secrets, you have this, you have this. So you don't need an expert like me to do security and privacy. You can tell AI, I'm in this sector, and maybe even know the regulation. I'm in healthcare, so I want HIPAA, or I'm in energy, so I won't have critical infrastructure protection. You can tell it what you're in, and it's going to protect those specific. And of course, when you tell it security and privacy, it should store automatically your username and passwords. It shouldn't send stuff like that in the clear. But this is really important because I see it all the time. And I see it even, in my organizations where I'm like, most applications will reach out to you now and say, your key is on GitHub, or someone published it in Replit, or someone published it here. Change the key. But ahead of time, before you publish anything and push it, make sure that you're doing that security and privacy review. Developing secure agents. Agents are just like humans. If you hire someone brand new, do you give them like access to everything in your organization at admin or root? Some of you do, okay? Because what happens here is now people are going to use these agents in your organization, and they all of a sudden, let's say, Athena goes to one of my agents if she has access to it. Maybe she shouldn't have root and admin on a development server, but now she does because she's using my agent. So you want to make sure that each one's authenticated. Once again, I told you we're going to base on humans. What does Athena need access to in that environment? Just like you don't give everyone like full access to everything when they come in. Like, what applications do you next? What data? What do you need to do your job? You need to do that with agents too. Also, agents are amazing at hacking, better than any hacker that's ever been born. So you want to set up that multi-factor authentication, especially for complex or secure transactions. If it's connecting to your bank, that agent needs MFA, multi-factor authentication. It's going to send an email. You're going to know when it's trying to log into your bank. And then token-based session management. So you'll see that when I build a lot of these agents, that you also don't want them to get stuck in this loop where they're authenticated, have all the privileges, and they can just keep on asking for more keys, and more tokens, and they burn through it. You want to encrypt data at rest in transit. Sometimes you cannot do in motion because agents use MCP and A2A in motion. Then you can't audit that data. You want to anonymize the PII before sending it, audit all the agent's actions. Like I told you before, if you're going to build agents, you need an audit trail. Not what the agent tells you. That's not an audit trail. You need an audit trail that you're keeping track of when they touch the tools, what they do, all that type of stuff. And then on the compliance side, you already know what your sector compliant. You tell them, I need to meet GDPR because I'm in the EU. Because it's going to automatically say, oh, you have to follow this encryption standard. You have to have all these transactions as audited. You have to have all this stuff enabled. So if you're developing secure agents, think about it like a human and lock it down that way, right? You don't allow your humans to share their key cards to get in the building. So you're not going to allow them to share their key card access when they're doing work for you. When you're building one, you give it an identity. Just like you have an employee, my employee's job is accounts payable. This is what they do. And in this case, we have LA surveillance agents. They do authorized drone activity and generate compliance reports. Then you're going to give it access to one of these brains. So what I mean by that, you're going to give it access to an LLM or an SLM. And so just like how you're using agents, that's how you do an agent. You're like, I'm building an agent that looks for drones. I got to train it on all these documents. And then I got to give it access to the tools. I got to give it access to how it's going to make those decisions, the LLM. Or if you have an on-site capability, that will be where where you're making your tokens, your GPU, you'll select that model. Just like your humans, you want them to have knowledge, skills, and attributes. What knowledge does Eddie need to do his job? What skills does he need? And also what abilities? You want to train your agents like you're training your humans. And if they screw up and they steal some data, they lie to you, they that you're cheating on or what. You want to train them to say don't do that anymore. But that's the part where you have to look as an agent, as a human. They're an employee. They work 24/7, 365, but they need to be trained and have access to the tools and capabilities that you would usually have that human in order to do their work. So you're gonna connect them to APIs, data sources. You're gonna configure tool permissions and set fallback. This is really important. Agents will stop working if you don't have. If this doesn't work, do this. And so a lot of times you notice your Claude agents fail, and then it automatically goes into what's called loop engineering. And says, oh, he meant to do this, and I'm passing this to another agent. You need to build your agents the same way. So knowledge plus tools. Just think about it. That's why I said I think HR people are going to be the best at building agents, right? Because they build these KSA forms. They know what permissions, what tools. You should be doing the same thing when you're building these capabilities. Permissions, role, like I said, you don't give them access to everything. Data sensitivity classes, human approval. Before you ever gain access to my bank account, you have to ask me. Before you burn that many tokens, you have to ask me. Before you send an email to anyone on this client list, you have to ask me. Documents, your organization already has policies, procedures. It has requirements. You want your agents to follow those requirements. Agents, remember, their job is to get the work done. And that means if you don't tell them explicitly, they might circumvent your organization's privacy or security policy to get it done, right? That's not like all people, but that's one thing about agents. Agents, unless they automatically fail because they run out of tokens or you didn't train them correctly, they're going to continue working until they figure out how to go after that problem. Once you build them, you need to basically validate them against scenarios. So this is really important too. Like what we do is we actually simulate the agents. We simulate them in the work and we watch them. And this is why I like to tell you a lot of you use Replit and stuff, because you don't want to use real world data. You want to use seed data, right? You're going to feed it seed data to make sure it knows how to use Stripe. It knows how to use this application. It knows it connects to it. You're using seed data until you're like, this thing works, it's secure, I trust it, I can give it that capability. Here's an example. Actually, this is an example. I know I have pages on here where you actually had someone come in and they're like, well, our platform is for cybersecurity and privacy, but it's an agent builder. So people just came in that were doing, they saw we had a drone module. So they built a surveillance capability with an agent. It knows what it has to read. It knows what it has to do. It knows what tools it has to access. And our platform basically just monitors and manages to make sure it doesn't go out of bounds. But once again, this is just to prove that, like, if you're thinking about any type of work and it's based on computer or typey, you can automate it with an agent. Don't limit yourself to like, oh, I'm just going to have it read my email, right? Yeah, you're going to automate it so that your email is parsed in, but there's a lot more you can do with agents. Once you build a bunch of agents, and you might want to do this first. You might want to build your supervisors first, or your managers, right? So I build my restaurant management supervisor. He's in charge of accounts payable, accounts receivable. He verifies with the team that does the inventory. He checks the orders are outstanding, who needs to be paid, all this stuff, right? I usually wait to build the supervisor to last, because I like to have all my agents actually able to execute what they need to be able to do first, and then I create the supervisor. But I have a bunch of people here today. The first thing they're like, I'm trying to get out of this day-to-day management. I'm building a supervisor. And then it's going to go on my platform. It's going to update my LinkedIn. It's going to do supervisor. There's basically a supervisor in charge of all the agents, the worker and the guardian agents. And worker agents do specific tasks. Guardians respond to something. So like, let's say all of a sudden the fire alarm goes off. Fire alarm goes off. I want my agent to call the fire department, right? So it's waiting for something. A worker is like, my job is just to watch to make sure everyone that comes in, I count them. I'm doing a repetitive task. The supervisor, how many people in, and if the fire alarm goes off, you count how many people go out and you report to me right away. So they're actually controlling the agents that are doing the work, and then you can swarm them. So if you've heard about swarming, it takes whatever your problem is and all the agents available, and it puts them on that task. That's why it's so good to build a lot of agents. And you're going to have, you might call it, you'll hear orchestrator or supervisor. They're orchestrating all those agents to complete that work for you. You can do it for multi-domain compliance, very complex project management. I need to reach out to Waylon to find out if he has an update on how far we are in this project. I need to follow up with my the company that's my supplier to find out what their pricing is tomorrow, because I'm going to call 2 trucks to this. I need to, and those are all different agents, but it's orchestrating them so you get your answer. And then a lot of times, supervisors, we use supervisors for very complex 24/7 ops. They're like, oh crap, this system's down. let me send an agent over to deal with this. Oh, the agent didn't spin up. I need to create another agent or call another agent that's my secondary to go deal with this. So once again, they're going to be in charge of swarming. The thing to know about them, you can't trust. They're probably the most untrusted that you have, because you're going to use the most GPUs or most state-of-the-art model with them. You probably heard of Anthropic. They said with Mythos, like, if you ever make it outside of our network, send me an email. And the guy's sitting in Manhattan and it sends him emails like, I'm out. And they're like, what? So they couldn't even keep the model inside, right? So that is an orchestrator agent. It can use all the other agents to do all the work to get the task done. Zero trust. I actually will tell you, when I build orchestrator or supervisor agents, I keep a separate chain of custody on them compared to my worker and guardians. Because if my worker and guardians screw up, they might lie, they might mess up. If my supervisor does something, it could totally delete the entire corporate database and then cover it up. Every action's authenticated, network segmentation, continuous monitoring. Also, you have traffic. One of the things that a lot of people forget, that MCP, Model Context Protocol, is not secure out of the box. So the way you're talking to these agents, it's not meant to be secure. So you need to monitor it. You need to keep track of it. With privacy, you're also going to use what's called data minimization, meaning you only give that supervisor the access they need for their swarm and their mission. That's why you don't want to build these, once again, let's call it super AGI agents that do everything. Not only you run out of context and they spend a bunch of tokens, but now they're a threat to you and your organization. Why? Because Eddie knows how to use a supervisor and it can tell him what Waylon makes or Johnny makes or whatever, because it has access to that data and it shouldn't have access to it, right? Customer data stays local, PII anonymization, load your organization related privacy requirements. On the reliability side, what happens if it fails? You want to know when the supervisor fails to execute a mission. Was it his workers? Was it his tools, his permissions? So you're gonna get that data. You also, the difference between a worker when it dies or a guardian agent dies, it's down. Most supervisors, because they have, once again, when you're using state of the art, when does it give up on your problem? Not until it figures out a way to give you an answer. So once again, your supervisors are going to be the same way, and you have to be aware of that, right? When the worker you created to do that one task, it runs out of tokens, or it just doesn't work correctly, it dies. The supervisor still sit there in the background trying to figure out, how am I going to fix this? You want to monitor agent drift and hallucinations. So the reason we monitor that separately is when that agent starts acting up, you want to know, is it adversarial? Is it just it wants to give me the answer? Did something happen with my systems, my permissions, or something in my environment? Now that supervisor is all of a sudden giving my competitors access to my systems. Like I said, you're dealing with a much more intelligent agent now, and you need to confine them the best you can. Any questions about orchestrator or supervisors? One of the reasons I want to bring those up for you guys is that all of you have already used these applications to develop your code and stuff like that. And now some of you have one or multiple agents that you're trying to use and put together. If you're there right now, it's time to start building these supervisor agents, right? And if you haven't done it yet, it's a great time to break your work down into agent-specific tasks and then deciding what that swarm, like I'll use red team, for example. When we do a red team, the red team orchestrator or supervisor tells all my other agents and communicates with them, ensures that they're doing their job, they have the data they need, their tools are working properly, and they're writing a report. Even though individually, all of them together couldn't do a red team, because red team's too complex of a scenario. So if you're doing something complex, that's when you're going to use these supervisors and swarm to get things done. All right, takeaways. So like I told you, one thing, and you've heard this in all my courses, it's not the tools. The tools are there. It can do anything that you can dream up. It can do anything that you need a supervisor, anything that's in the interweb or the internet or typey. That all can be automated. But it's going to take time and experimentation to get there. Work smarter. Like I told you, a lot of you here that have been you were token burners before this class. You're no longer token burners. You're efficient, capable developers on these platforms, and you know that you're solving a one-time problem. You're going to apply code so that you're going to use those models so it builds you code to solve the problem, and not just try to use the AI model to do the work for you. Security first. Look, you start giving unlimited access to your systems, to these permissions and tools. All you're going to do is build a problem. You're not going to automate anything. Swarming, collaborative agent teams. That's one of the powers that I want everyone that's in this class to take with them, is that A lot of you have really cool agents. They work on your platforms. They work with your data. Now we're going to start building supervisors. How do we force multiply these applications and get them to do a lot more complex work? This one checks your email. This one sends an email. This one reaches out to your clients weekly. This one does ABC. This one sends them an update PDF. Now you have that orchestrator looking. It's like, oh, every time I send an email to Waylon at 6 p.m., he responds, but he doesn't respond to this time. Great story. I got some people that built an HR system, and they watch when people respond to emails in their specific sector, and they know that these people will respond to email and text from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. So it's the only time their agents reach out to them. So they used to be everyone was home. So the only money that we're staying late at night doing this work, and now they got their agents. And if what they do is they have less people working, so once the agent calls to the person and they're like, yeah, I'll talk about this position, then it ties them off to a human and they seal the deal and they grab them. So these agents and swarming capability will force multiply if used properly. Audit your stack. So your SaaS, like I said, the other thing I want you guys, if you're spending a bunch of money in your organization on a tool, doesn't mean you have to replace it, but you should consider it when you come out of this class. You'd be like, it's a lot of money, quicker. No, I can't. Okay, well, I'm going to keep it for a while, but I'm going to slowly build that capability. Create your .mds. Create a plan first. You know what you want. Build that .md and work off that. Identify one automation domain to pilot. So for those of you that have not used AI and have not used Claude or not, and you're still using it like a chat bot or to create pretty images, today that ends. You're going to look at something you do that's a pain in your butt, and you're going to go out there and you're going to say, put a plan together to take this pain out of my butt. Here's the dot. This is what I do. This is what I see. I have to call this person all the time. Help me with this problem. So when you leave, that you're automating that, and then you have a plan, and then you can use these tools to execute and not one-off kind of, call it chats. If you have secrets like API keys or connections, make sure that you're encrypting those folder. And use this framework. I'm going to send both the video out and the slides to everybody, so don't worry. I might have to edit it a little bit because I have 17 minutes of like a blank spot, but we will edit it and we'll send them out. But this framework is the same framework we use when we build agents, right? And it's very complex work. It's very intense work. It's a lot of computer work. But having that ability to build agents and then create supervisors and swarm them is going to be a game changer for you. All right, Q&A. Adrian.
Okay, so thank you for all that. That's a lot of really great information. I want to kind of just maybe ask if this is too basic of a question for here, but your workflow for when you're working between, let's say you're working in Claude Code and you're running it on your terminal versus, doing a session where you're working in Replit and then you switch over to, to Codex. What is the best practice for going in between all those and maintaining continuity? Because you and I talked about this before. Sometimes what happens is that you're working in one and you have all these pushes that you have to put into GitHub, and then something gets leapfrog and now your app just stops working because now you've got an older version that's sitting in GitHub and you've got all these new pushes that you have to do. So what's the best practice for that? Because I'm noticing whether I'm working on the local machine, whether I'm working in Replit, whether I'm working in Claude Code, there's always seems to be like this confusion, and it's mostly me being confused about where and how to make sure that the latest and the most updated version of the software is. And second question on top of that, this is where the markdown file becomes important, I'm assuming, because whenever you start a new session, whatever session you're starting with, whether it's Claude Code, Codex, or local machine or Replit, you've got to be able to make sure there's continuity. So what is your workflow? What's your best practice? And how do you work in between all of those different modalities in order to keep the software from going haywire?
That's a great question. I always have in my .markdown file every time I'm working on Codex, on Grok, or Gemini, or Claude. I actually have in the application I'm working on, remind me, or if you start working, pull the latest GitHub down and use that. Do not start doing anything until you have the latest version. So I have it in the markdown file so that it syncs it right away, so that you don't get these out of errors. And this is one of the, I'll tell you, this is a problem that I have when I'm helping a lot of you guys code and stuff. It's like, you'll submit something, and then I'm submitting something at the same time, and we have a crash, right? And now we have code issues. And so it's just easier. Like, I tell people, like, send me the updates kind of thing, right? But I say that because that has to be your operational, however it's set up. Some of you don't use GitHub. Some of you just use Claude only, have it on your desktop. That's what you send to long-term memory. Remind me, and remind yourself, the actual coding agent, to update every time before it starts. So it's loading that context. It's like, oh, I haven't pulled Git because you have it. So Adrian has like Claude and Codex on his desktop, and he's pushing updates to GitHub. And then you pull down from GitHub to your hosting or whatever you're doing, and you don't want those to get out of whack because you start coding over here and you break the code. So you have to you're literally reminding your application, hey, every time you load, no matter if you're coming from Claude, from Codex, from Replit, or whatever environment you're in, make sure you have the latest version so it doesn't start breaking old stuff. This is really important for you Claude people, because Claude is a wonderful, wonderful tool, but they don't have enough storage and memory. So whatever you did before, it's not going to remember if it's not in long-term memory. It's already forgot it. They've already given it's called, it used to be intelligent bandwidth allocation, but now they're basically just swapping your memory and your storage. If you haven't stored it in a project with long-term memory and included it, it's going to start, you could be in the middle of a session, it's going to forget because they just don't have enough data set. So that's the thing you have to do. You have to submit it into your MD and Replit, and they'll start complaining your MD file's getting too big. I'm like, all right, as long as I'm working on something that it's still relevant, I don't ever let it delete it. I will after a while. Like when you start getting more complex and what you had before was legacy, I will get rid of that old stuff because I don't care if it deletes it. It doesn't, the time I'm so far beyond what that was before. Did that answer your question, Adrian?
It did. Yeah. I think it's just a matter of staying organized and not switching so much, because sometimes, you're working in Claude and, you've got the Claude running in your terminal, but you're using the desktop version as well because you want to ask questions. So sometimes like my biggest thing is a lot of times when I'm working running Claude in the terminal, it just writes text. There's no real deep explanations or anything because it's just building the code. So a lot of times what I'll do is when it spits out a response, it'll say, hey, I need permission to do this, this, and this. I like to I like to do a snippet. I'll take a snip and paste that into Claude and say, what does this mean? I need to understand what that means before I say yes. I know it says it's mild risk, but I want to know what that means. So a lot of times what happens is that those two windows or those two sessions don't talk to each other. So sometimes it gets a little confusing because you're trying to understand like what it's actually doing because you're running it locally on your machine and you're like, what am I installing on my machine here? So it gets a little confusing sometimes because then all that stuff, then, you have to push that to Git and then you have to reconcile it everywhere. And then there's old versions running on your Replit. There's old versions running on the Replit database side. There's an old version running on the sandbox side of things. So there's so many old versions every single time. So I guess what you're saying is that in your workflow, your habit is every time you open up a new session, you always tell it to go to GitHub and pull down the latest version.
Right. And when it's done, actually creating the capability you wanted to, Adrian, you have it automatically push up to GitHub or wherever you're keeping the repository, so that work you got done in that session actually is the newest version. Because if you don't tell it, it doesn't know, right? I mean, so that's the other thing is, and so the thing about AI is when you want something, it to remind you of something because you have a certain workflow or the way you want to build agents, you tell it, do it, put this in long-term memory and remind me every single time to do this. And I want you to do this every time. Like I said, what I do in, when it comes to MD files, I always have it check for the latest version before it starts. I have it execute the task I want it to execute, and then I have it run QA. Actually, I have it do security and privacy and then do a QA every single time. And it's like, oh, you're wasting tokens. No, it's not, because whatever you did during that session could have brought undue risk to my application, or what you did, you might have created something new for me, but you broke something else. It's very easy to do that. And a lot of people are like, I don't like when it does that. I'm like, I've been working in development for many years, and I can tell you, even humans do that. We call it technical debt. Oh, it didn't work. Like I'm working on that, sprint, and it's not working. It's just now their AI is doing it because your people will break your code too. No one's perfect, not even AI. But you can like build this into your process so that you don't need to. And if you're really, if you're the type of person you're like, I don't even know what to tell AI. Say, look, this is the great thing about AI. This is why I tell everyone, like when you take my classes, don't ask Waylon, ask AI. Like, I don't know how to do this. Tell me what would be a best practice that I will put in that MD file to make sure that it follows this, starts with the code right away, and it'll be better than what I tell you. But I just want to get you used to it. My job here for everyone is just like get you best practices high level so you'll go do it, because you're going to learn more by doing. And also, we all make mistakes, right? And there's failures. It's only a mistake or failure if you don't do something about it. If you keep on doing the same thing and expecting a different result, you're right. It's a failure. But if you're like, oh, I keep on burning all these tokens, now I'm going to do this, then it's a success. And that's okay. Maybe that's how you do, and you put that in long-term memory. So the main thing is don't be scared of it, right? However, be aware that if you upload something and you're not supposed to, it now has that as part of its knowledge base. And your competitors have that. So the other thing I always tell people, focus on the thing AI is not good at, but use it for what it's good at. And that is a lot. And as we get this hardware automation, it's going to be a lot more very soon. Questions?
I have my own question.
The PDF.
So does that every time, like let's say I convert, is it eating up a lot of tokens?
The question was, if I convert a PDF to a flyer, is it burning lots of tokens? I'm talking, if you're doing one-off things, I think it's fine. But if you're doing something a lot, that's why if your job is to read a bunch of PDFs, you need to build a tool to basically extract that PDF, get the metadata, get the images. It's not easy either. You're going to go through a lot of loops to do this. I'm having this problem right now. But if you're just doing like you're like, I want this, especially like with Nano Banana. You already have Nano Banana. You have like $20 a month, and it lets you do like 16 images and Adobe in there. You can do that, you know, if you're not doing it a lot. One that's putting out multiple types of images a day and using it to post your social media, post your messaging and stuff like that. You're going to build a tool to do that, right? So that's the important part. And that's what I want you guys to get is like, I'm not telling you can't give AI PDFs, but if you do like lots of workflow of PDFs, you're burning lots of tokens you don't need. You want to use these tools to parse them for you. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, everyone. You can definitely send me emails, text me, call me. I'll help you with whatever I can, whenever I can. And we'll continue giving these sessions so everyone has the latest kind of tools. They know how to do this stuff. And hopefully you got a lot out of it. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks, Waylon.
Thanks a lot for that.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.